How are we
Good
doing?
morning.
Good morning. Okay. Well, I'll kick off then. So thank you all very much for joining this webinar. My name's Collette from Zocchi and I'm hosting this. I'm a fractional people officer. I'm also judge of this year's Company Culture Awards. And I have to say the UK has got some truly brilliant employers, and it was a real privilege to see some of those stories firsthand. And I was just really struck by the courage of those leaders and organisations that are putting those practices on record. We know that workplaces are changing dramatically. So big shout out to Don't Panic for creating this platform to showcase some of these brilliant stories so we can all learn what good looks like and how it's evolving and changing. And again, a big thank you to Don't Panic for setting up this webinar and giving us this opportunity to talk about this real hot topic. But there is an employee engagement crisis at the moment. I don't know if people have seen it, but a couple of days ago, Gallup shared their latest employee engagement research, which showed that on a global scale, only 20% of employees are engaged. And in the UK, it gets worse, just 10%. So that's potentially 9 out of 10 of your employees are disengaged or disenfranchised. And AI is playing a big part of that in both burden and solution. According to some Gartner research at the end of last year, 2025, 65% of employees said that they are excited about using AI at work. But the C-suite executives are often putting AI's lack of added business value as a reason that employees are resistant to the adoption of AI tools. That Gartner research, I think it was nearly 3,000 employees that were surveyed. And the data said that nearly 40% of those employees are not using AI, even though they are told that they can, because their co-workers aren't using it. And that Gartner research sort of further indicates that the root problem here is that executive urgency is leading to rushed implementations of AI solutions with insufficient consideration of the implications on the workforce and employees. And I've seen this firsthand. I work with a non-profit supporting young employees that are navigating their first roles. And I'm seeing all sorts of scenarios, even legacy tools that are being ripped out. And then these young people are being asked to go back and do these jobs manually. It's fascinating. It's far reaching and across the board. So in today's session, we're trying to cut through that AI hype to try and understand what's really working and start to think about how to align AI adoption with the trust, ethics, and your culture. And let's try and move from being accidental around the leadership in this subject to intentional. So let me introduce you to your panel, our set of experts here. So Kerstin Andlaw is a systemic change consultant and a fellow UK company culture judge. Kerstin, you work with leaders, executives and teams across organisations as they take on new roles and challenges and projects that signify change and significant change. Kerstin, hi.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for a nice introduction.
Hopefully captured that okay.
You've done very well, thank you.
Secondly, I'm doing this in alphabetical order. Matt Roberts, OKR trainer, implementation specialist, and you work with companies on strategy and goal setting. And I know that you help simplify these really complex subjects such as measurement, and you work with leadership teams to help them with employee engagement. Good morning, Matt. We can't hear you, Matt. You work on that. And Tom Kegode, another fellow judge, another consultant. Tom, you've spent 16 years at Lloyds Banking Transformation, and now you work in that really interesting intersection of people, culture, and innovation. Hi, Tom. Can't hear you either, Tom.
See, I was so dedicated to not disrupting in the opening that I put mute on, and now it feels like we're back in 2020 again when we can click. So look, thanks so much for the introduction. Really looking forward to the conversation. I don't think it's ever been more topical than it is now. And yeah, really looking forward to the chat today.
Absolutely. Matt, can I just check that we can hear you?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me now. That was my incompetence.
All right, that's our tech gremlins out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to ask the panel a question to discuss at the moment, but we are going to put a poll up. if that's that should be live already. And the poll is around, where is AI creating the most tension in your organizations right now? So please fill out the poll. It'd be really interesting to sort of get that sway. And then if you've got any questions or comments, anything, please put them in the Q&A section, so we can actually hopefully unpack those, and again, the panel can talk about that. So the question to the panel is, what is the one thing about AI and culture that you are not seeing being talked about at the moment? Kerstin, can I start with you?
Yes. So I think from my perspective and what I see is that we're focusing a lot on tools and on productivity, and we're paying far less attention to what is being amplified beneath the surface when it comes to AI. AI doesn't enter a neutral system. It enters a living relational field that is shaped by trust, by fear, by power, by voices, by unspoken norms and rules. And whatever sits there is what's going to be amplified. And so if we have a system that is low in trust, we're going to get fragile accountability or limited psychological safety. And AI doesn't fix that. It's going to accelerate that. Faster decisions don't automatically mean better decisions, and more output doesn't mean more impact or more wisdom. And I think that for me, that's where the real tension sits. AI is increasing speed, visibility, it's increasing capability as well, but it's not increasing judgment, critical thinking, ethical clarity, or relational capacity. I actually think it is, in a way, reducing that, because we don't have to use it as much. And so it's like a muscle that you stop using, it atrophies. So for me, the question is not how do we adopt AI? For me, the question is around what kind of system are we accelerating, and do we have the cultural maturity to hold it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll be quiet now.
Yeah. No, great. Matt.
That's really interesting. My lens is, obviously that's a bit of that, but my lens is very much starting with strategy. Companies are in the business of obviously building cultures, but they're in the business of satisfying customers, developing competitive advantage, developing a sustainable business that grows revenue and profit. And that's the lens for different stakeholders. And that's the lens that a lot of this is being driven through as. And, we know that culture drives strategic advantage, but we also know that productivity does. We also know that how we behave does. There are lots of intertwined parts to this, which makes it so complicated. And you probably saw Meta and Block's announcement that they're doing away with middle managers and having coaches in teams that are highly AI enabled to drive productivity. This world's changing so fast right now, but the essence of what they're trying to do is speed up, balance human potential with productivity that can originate out of AI. It's still trying to drive into how are we different, how are we competitive, how do we sustain growth, how do we beat, our competitors for that sort of that all important choice that we're trying to be selected for. Because consumers are, able to find any company they want out there. Who they choose is a factor of, strategy, goal setting, culture, AI, productivity, etc. And it's a spaghetti mess out there. We get to see behind the curtain, and we get to see what goals are being shaped, formed, committed to, how organizations are structuring themselves beyond the org chart, how different management structures are coming in, and AI is everywhere. So I'm looking forward to how this chat develops.
Yeah, thank you. Tom.
Yeah, so I love the conversation. I love the things that are coming out both from Kerstin and Matt there. I've always been really fascinated about how we work and how we bring people into shaping the work that we do. And I think, there's a couple of things that were called out there around that kind of, that culture is the real enabler. Like, if you're accelerating something that is already broken, then you're going to find yourself in an even more of a sticky mess when you get further down the line. So I think there's that bit around how do you do that kind of diagnostic phase to really understand where you're at, and then start to open up the conversation, but bring people into that conversation as well. I think they kind of, when it links back into productivity, I think the thing that I think is a huge opportunity, and actually, like when you said earlier on, 65% of people are excited about this opportunity, right? So that's kind of already telling you there's a growth mindset there, and people are saying, I'm up for this. But what we need to do as organizations and as leaders is to create the conditions for people to be able to sort of exercise that curiosity, right? And really dial into that kind of human potential, because I think that one of the coolest things about AI is that it's really, really quite good at organizing messy human thoughts into some kind of logic. So I think that's something that, where I've worked in the innovation space before, and there was always a barrier when it came to capability of what you could create. But actually now, if you can think it, you can make it. So I think it's about how do we create safe areas for people to be excited and actually test, learn, but also think about how they might be able to be curious about what that might look like for their wider team. And often I think that comes from understanding a personal use case first, and then you can start to be curious around, well, I wonder how this might be able to speed up some of the things or take out the parts of the work that I really don't like, because that's when you get that perfect combination of a culture that enables curiosity, but also really focuses on the human virtues and the stuff that we love using, so we can strip out the stuff that we don't like so much and focus on thinking, judgment, and actually give ourselves time and space to do that. And I think at the moment, that's the real opportunity.
Yeah. Okay, so I think there was a few themes that have come out there that you guys have kind of crossed over. There's that trust and safety element, so the human element, and then there's the productivity element. And my very simplistic view is employers, leaders are aiming at the productivity element, but are they then making it safe and allowing the trust or enabling trust to be built with the employees who potentially, there's all this kind of hyperbole from media that these AI overlords are coming to take our jobs. I think we're moving beyond that. I think we're starting to realize that we can harness this for our own productivity. But Tom, as you said, are employers making it safe, giving good guidance? So what's the risk here in that aiming at productivity, but how are you enabling trust with your employees? If 65% of people are interested in getting involved, what are we getting wrong? Who wants to go first? I'll stop being headmistress here.
I'll quickly come back in, because I think what this is showing us, right? 65% of people are excited, but then they're not using it. But with the technology that's being rolled out as this is, right? General purpose technology, it's going to change everything, the way that everything is done. The risk that you really have is also when you have that, when you don't have that control and you don't create that culture, is that people bring their own AI to work. So what was really interesting that came out in that in the Gallup report that you mentioned earlier, Collette, was that is saying the impact that it has when your direct line manager, their view and their perspective on AI and how that's being used across that team has a significant impact on what the approach that the individual has and their perspective. So then you have a risk of people bringing in their own tools and doing it off grid because they're trying to find ways to be productive because they want to, but that bottleneck is at that manager level. So I think there's some really interesting, and it's about starting to open up that conversation, because productivity in an unsafe way can be a real risk. And as Kerstin says, you could be starting to accelerate something that is not what you want to see.
Yeah. Matt, I've heard you talk before about the knowledge drain. If, Tom, as you're talking about, it's kind of is turning into the Wild West out there, that people are either using it underground or their own ways of working. How is an organisation capturing that knowledge?
By knowledge drain, to define knowledge drain in your be more specific.
If people are harnessing their own agent in their own way with limited guidance from the organization, as Tom said. If there's no policy procedure, it's Wild West, do what you want. How on earth can an organization capture that knowledge and learn from it?
So if we just go back a step, there's a set of skills and capabilities that a company and its marketplace and its strategy and its teams need in order to thrive. And for certain people, certain skills, certain teams, AI, whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, or anything else, can start to obviously have an impact. And nobody I've met is blind to using one of those. There are, I think, as Tom was hinting as well, there are different levels of maturity. And at one end of the spectrum, you've got people who are highly competent at creating agents that are autonomous, and they might have many working and doing lots of automated things. And I saw a funny LinkedIn post where an email had been sent to somebody from a HR team telling them it was okay to be sick and they hope they get well soon. And that the boss said, was this tone the right tone? Da, 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 da. And you could see that it was an automated AI agent doing the role. So there are obviously at the more competent AI end, we are amplifying our own potential by getting lots of automations stood up. And somewhere in the middle, you've got this guidance that we have either provided or not, which is the organization would like you to develop this maturity. And this is what it means to you. This is what it means to us as a kind of not just the what, the why. This is what it means to us in our ability to serve our customers better, for your career, for different perspectives on that stakeholder. And I think I've spoken to a good number of organizations, but I don't have a massive sample size. I still think there's too much ambiguity. I still think, what tools are we meant to use? How are we meant to use them? What is the end point that I need to get to in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months? What does me following this strategic guidance of developing this capability mean for me and my personal goals? Why does this matter not just to me, but to us? Is that clear to most people in most places right now? I doubt it is. You get to see the flagship kind of case studies. So Zapier is a good one because they're right at the heart of this. They are publishing all of their different levels of AI maturity and how different people in the org are being driven through it. It's a really interesting kind of quadrant grid. And they are currently expecting nobody just to be using an agent just to do kind of prompt output, which is kind of where a lot of people are. They're expecting, agentic AI to be kind of normalized within every employee. But I don't think that specificity is around too much.
Can I add to that? Because I absolutely agree with you, Matt, and I think, Tom, you touched on it as well. And for me, there is really a question around the ethical element and the ethical boundaries, because those ethical boundaries give employees and executives a lot of assurance in order to then engage with AI through a learning approach. Mm-hmm. Because even though we have 65% of people that are excited about this technology, being excited about it doesn't mean that I might not also be afraid of the technology or have a dislike in some aspects towards it. And when we add pressure to fear, so I have a fear or a dislike of technology, and now you add pressure because I have to use it or I have to meet a certain quota of AI usage, what we get is resistance. And that prevents us from actually engaging with it, exploring it, testing it, and figuring out what is a good way of using it. So I think of it in the sense of creating those ethical boundaries based on principles rather than hard rules, because that means we can adapt it to our working environment and the tasks and the projects that we're working within. Yeah.
So when you talk about fear, Kerstin, it's really interesting because you've got, classic kind of neurological change management approaches. You're either creating sort of cortisol or dopamine. Yeah. If you don't approach and explain things well, if you don't show people where the end point is. If you don't make it safe, they do the calculation in their head and they go, is this good for me, bad for me? I'm going to either to block this, sandbag it consciously or unconsciously, or I'm going to suffer. I'm going to start creating beliefs, whether true or not, that this is something that I should be fearful of, and cortisol is spiked. And I think this is very much in the change management space. This is very much back to core programming and neuroscience, and how you create a reward response from AI is how you message. It's cultural, it's honesty. It's, not everyone is going to come out well from this, but they can be reskilled, upskilled, developed, etc. And I think that's the key for me. Not seeing this just as an AI enablement era, but this is about change. This is about our own neurochemistry, neuroscience. It's about our caveman programming, that does have cortisol, dopamine, serotonin, and all these things that really drive us. I think we've got to kind of run everything lenses to.
And I think when it comes to that kind of fear point, something I found particularly interesting over the last few weeks. So since I sort of moved out of corporate, I've been doing quite a lot around future skills and in different pockets and different perspectives, teams and leaders and organizations. But also I've started to get into the education sector. So I've just become a governor for two secondary schools. And I also just happened to be the CEO used to be my teacher of this multi-academy trust. So I was really interested in how they are starting to think about the impact that this technology has. So listening around some of the kind of commitments that they're making around productivity for teachers I think is particularly interesting, because then if you think about how that then impacts the students, the pupils that are learning, so there's that kind of whole, how can you really define that? And we're looking at the kind of concept of creating a safe way for them to experiment, be curious about what they could potentially do. Now, the other side of that, I was on 2 school visits just before Easter, secondary school students, and we had a bit of a listening session with some of those students. And I was particularly surprised when I was asking them about sort of what they're experiencing, what they're thinking about for their future. And actually, I had year 9 students, right? So I guess what age is that? I guess 12, 13, 14, who are talking to me, and they're saying, well, I need to be thinking about when they're thinking about their options, I need to be thinking about, well, what are the jobs that I can do where AI is not going to take that job? So actually, we've got people at the age of 13, 14 that are fearing what this means for their future. So I think there's a huge opportunity as this technology is coming, we're on the journey. So how do we almost think about reframing the cultural use of this technology, almost in a kind of a literacy, in the same way that we do with literacy? So AI literacy, I think, is an interesting concept, because how do we, because a lot of the kind of challenges can be around, children are naturally curious, inquisitive, and will try things, right? So actually, not surprising if you're going to find some kind of AI written essay popping up into classrooms. But actually, what's the development around the learning and encouraging people to understand the technology, the impact where it can help, but where actually the opportunity that you have in this school setting is to really sort of uplift your human skills that are going to mean that your co-pilot, when you start using not the brand, but like you think of as AI as a co-pilot, and the things that you feed it will be better with you're feeding it with deeper human insight and your own knowledge. So I think there's a whole of that, and that was something I'd never, because I've only really looked at from an organizational perspective. But actually, when I'm hearing people that are thinking that, and actually then you see some of the uplift in the options, where people are opting for one of the most popular options in year 9 at the particular school was construction. So so it's a really interesting thing that's going to kind of, that fear element. How do we make sure that those kind of, in the same way that managers' perceptions of it impact the employees, actually everybody's perception of it impacts their next generation and their next generation coming through. So I think it's a really pivotal point for that kind of understanding those human and neuro parts that you mentioned there, Matt, as well.
I think just taking that back to the workplace. So Kerstin, you made a point about ethics. So, what do the ethics look like from a leadership perspective? And then the other layer on that is we've got multiple generations in the workplace now. And you read all these stats about women of a certain age that are not getting involved in AI at all, despite potentially 65% of employees wanting to play with it. So how are we making it safe? Like, what's the leadership ethics around that in the workplace to go back to that enablement?
I think to me, I'm going to jump in here and loop it back to what Tom and Matt has also said, is it's really that human element. And that is what connects us, at the end of the day, across generations, is our human element. I look at my kids and they roll their eyes at my ability of dealing with basic tech, which I'm sure many people have, but they also face that fear of, what are my job choices and how is AI going to take my livelihood away one day? So I think the human element and actually shifting the narrative from this being an age of AI enablement, but perhaps this is an age of human enablement through the use of AI, because actually, if we were to shift our attention to the things that make us humans human, and, through that define our ethical boundaries and the purpose of our organizations and the purpose of using AI, it shifts the whole narrative. Because what I often observe is we're using AI to use AI. But if we then think about the impact of that, the ecological impact, the resource use of using AI just for the sake of using it, it's negative. Whereas if we were to look at it from the perspective of, if I use AI in an area where it really, drastically increases our impact as an organization, not just on our bottom line, but also on the common good, humanity, ecology, future generations, now we have a game changer. There's so much potential there. But I think it's really grounded in the human element. That's what we bring. And AI, thankfully so far, cannot produce that. It can create an illusion of it, but it's not real yet.
There's an interesting question that's come in from one of the audience that says, what are our thoughts on the use of digital twins of execs to make them more accessible to staff? Now, I think we're still in the same space here. I'm just want to double check I understand what a digital twin is. Is it my hologram? Is that what we mean? And does any of the panel have any thoughts or experience in this?
So I think some of this is the kind of the concept that we're hearing about around execs almost sort of developing a bot of themselves that they can deploy into certain scenarios and certain situations that is programmed with their knowledge, their thoughts, their tone of voice, and almost kind of can act as a digital version of them. I think there's some really interesting research where I was listening to on the radio last night, I think actually, Raj Chowdhury from LSE was talking about it, and it's almost like it passed. I think they call the Turing test. Like it was like almost that kind of ability for people to they couldn't tell almost with and actually, so that's quite interesting in itself. I think this really neatly links back to that ethical approach, right? So there needs to be very clear guardrails around how this is to be used, and it's almost this is something where if it's done in a covert way and an exec is deploying themselves into situations and it's being made to look like it's them, that's where you really like you just tank trust, right? And actually, what's that saying about how much you value your your people if you're out there doing that? Whereas actually, if it's deployed in the right way, it can do the opposite, I think, because actually you're saying, look, I can't be, as an exec, I can't be everywhere all the time, but I'd love for you to be able to interact. And actually, there may be a point where it gets to where you can use that to get that. And then if it surfaces something, and they may program it in a certain way that it surfaces something to a point where actually this needs to come into a conversation that needs to come straight into my line of sight. But then again, almost that, what's the agreed interaction that the actual person would have with that? So I think it comes back to, again, how do you create that ethical approach to the way that you use it, which can like either make or break something like that, and not using it for sort of covert practices is my view.
I think this touches on skills as well. So there's I use Claude quite a lot, and Claude has this concept of skills. And I follow a guy from HubSpot who talks a lot about how he's using AI. And one of the things that he talks a lot about is being able to take an expert that's got a body of work published on the web, and to develop, get your agent to go and get that body of work from a trusted expert, and then develop a skill. And it's not dissimilar to an exec saying, well, this is, my skill set is broad, or this is how I think, and philosophically, this is how I want us to work. Therefore it just passes everything through that. And I think that creates all kinds of both opportunity and nightmare, because as much as I could create an agent that is built around a strategy expert like Roger Martin that I really love, what the flip side of what we do is we use goal frameworks, with OKRs being one of them. If you were to build an agent like the Gemini one, that so you go and do a Gemini search on how to implement that framework, it's bloody awful advice, because it's the advice comes from Google. Google's 190,000 people, and they do it in a particular way that's not very good. Therefore, the source of the knowledge is massively impactful on the quality of the output.
Yeah.
How do we know when it's right and when it's wrong? Well, that's our ability to apply context, apply culture, apply values, apply guardrails. When should I just take this answer? When should I go and question it? It's a complex area, but my worry, based on how I've been interacting with knowledge and skills this week, is it very much depends on what that's trained on. And then I think that goes back to what Collette was saying earlier. When does an employee perceive that you're using them to train themselves to redundancy, taking their expertise and context, putting it inside an agent, and then saying, thank you very much? And I think that's going on as well. And because ultimately they're just, parrots of what they've been taught. They're really clever ones, but that's more or less what they're doing. So how we control what goes in also controls what comes out, and our willingness to put stuff in is kind of a product, also impacts what comes out. And which gets back to, again, that question that we're on here for, culture. Are we being honest about we are in training mode? We are building context. We are building guardrails. We are building philosophical beliefs on when should AI stop. So we built an agent within our own tooling, and we have very clear guardrails to say, don't give them the answer. Tell them to go grab some people in the office and have a conversation. Here are the questions that would facilitate a workshop. It's not that the AI couldn't have given them an answer. It's knowing that the AI shouldn't give them an answer. Humans would come up with a better answer with more perspectives and different ways of working. How many people are doing that? And I think I've fallen into this, if I'm honest. I sometimes take what is a plausible good, and sometimes I go, Christ, that's brilliant. But actually, is it? Do we all get, influenced by what appears to be good? How often do we all stop and say, that needs checking? Or, my personal favorite of mine is a group of people with different neurological types, an ADHD brain with a autistic brain with a neurotypical brain mashed up together. They come up with stuff that AI would never come up with. It's net new. It's not repetition or parroting. And that's the skill of the kind of leadership for me right now is how do we advise on that? How do we have this conversation not in a boardroom, but in front of people?
Yeah.
How do we bring them in?
Absolutely.
And I think there's also the implication that all of that has, and to circle back to Kristen's question about the digital twins, one thing is, how do you approach that? But the other thing is, what's the implication of having a digital twin? What's the implication on developing people? delegating to people, building the capabilities in your system, in human beings, because otherwise we have these dependencies on these very few individuals and the rest are just kind of, focusing on tasks and transactions. And that's not actually, focusing on our strength, particularly now with AI, focusing on our human strength and what Matt was saying there, really leveraging the opportunities to create new ideas, because what we're going to get from AI is, different versions of existing ideas.
Yeah.
And I think I love that. And it's almost this. So a couple of things. This book I discovered in the train station on my way to London the other day. Jamie Bartlett, you may know the Missing Crypto Queen podcast, tech author. But this is a great book for anyone on this webinar. That really brings to life some of the kind of the impact, but the opportunities, also some of the risks and some of the weird things that happen with large language models. And when you bring them with humans, I'd highly recommend it. I think that kind of real focus on and probably tapping into that productivity lens that Matteo's put in here around that kind of increasing productivity, what we're talking about when it comes to productivity. So and also it kind of crosses over a little bit with what Matt was saying. So I had an ADHD diagnosis a couple of years ago, and I'm finding that the use and how I partner with AI tools is giving me like an additional chip in my brain where I'm like, oh, I can really kind of identify and bring things out that I never would have been able to do before. Almost to the point where sometimes that productivity can become slightly addictive, and you're thinking, I can do it. I could just do this now. And it's almost, you've got to rein yourself back in sometimes. I think when it comes from an organizational context, the where organizations seem to have been, and this is where we think about those kind of producing widgets and that kind of, organizations have been very much getting the tools in, investing in those tools and looking at ways to be more efficient. So doing the right thing almost, I think it's almost how can we then switch from that efficiency space where we're speeding up and automating to leveling up around effectiveness. So actually, I think then it's really starting to understand: are we doing the right things as an individual? But then you also start to open that up as a team, and then you can look at it from an organizational perspective as well. So automation and speed, that's there now. But actually, are we automating and speeding up the right things? And how can we open up conversations? Because all of this starts with a team level conversation. Like, let's have a chat about this. Like, run a book club and like talk about this and learn, because then you can get people to a baseline understanding. So, and for me, that's why it always comes back to curiosity, because if you've got that curiosity, you can create that kind of, and you can enable people to utilize some of those skills that they enjoy using, typically that kind of creativity. But also, like, it needs to be a conversation, a dialogue that has opened up. And I think when we're linking it back to what we're talking about here, that's what managers and leaders and line managers have a really important role in creating those conditions for that.
I agree. If I can just interject. So I remember I'm going to show my age now, at an SEO agency in the sort of early noughties. And one of my sort of co-directors, new smartphone came out in like 2004, 2005. And he was like, look at this. This is so liberating. I can now get my email 24/7. I could be on the beach on holiday and get my email. I'm like, in hindsight, what was liberating about that? Are we in danger of doing the same thing? So I just want to go back to Matteo's question here. So when talking about the race to increasing productivity via AI, are we talking about productivity in terms of producing more widgets, more burden, or more about impact, which might focus more on the quality of thought, relationships, rather than business, which for me frames the role of what AI would become. So Tom, you've started to allude to that, but I'd love to hear other opinions around that.
I'm just going to add something here. We did a survey recently around this, and what we found was that 33% reported that they found with the use of AI they can create more output, they're more productive. 22% felt it did the opposite. It actually created more work for them. And 33% said that it enabled them to do deeper thinking. So it suggests that they used AI in a different way. And only 11% said that it improved collaboration. And now I don't think that it's got anything to do with AI itself. It's to do with the culture and the leadership and the conditions that will create one or the other. And that's where the focus needs to be, you know.
Back to leadership. Back to leadership. Yeah.
So critical in all of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think self-awareness as well is really important. The reason why I say that is we do quite a lot of work around human biases. One of them is confirmation bias. We are looking for knowledge and patterns that confirm what we already think. AI is so good at that. Is this a good idea? Yes, it's a good idea, and here's some bells and whistles to go with it. You're so smart. It's having the ability to think critically, to understand our own humanity, our own biases, and to, if you want to use it as, an intellectual sparring partner, you have to have the skills to tell it that's what you're looking for. It's so many things. It's almost an impossible conversation to have. And I think, to Tom's point, the starting point is to start the conversation. And I think, get managers, leaders, teams together, create manifestos, policies, guidance notes. And I think all of these documents that are probably missing in most places are not static. They're very much living. The world is speeding up. Technology is changing. How we approach this, what we think today might not be what we think tomorrow. But I think the starting point keeps coming back in this conversation to getting the right people in the room round a table. And if you put your values include honesty, if you're not getting people in a room, you're not living that value.
Yeah. Okay,
I think the other thing that could be quite interesting with this is so I've definitely noticed since we've seen much more, how much I'm using AI. I'm also now much more actively seeking out analog opportunities as well. So how can you almost fuse some of those things? So and it links back to Matt's point around that self-awareness and kind of thinking about, okay, so if I'm dialing up the use of technology, where might I want to dial that down and actually think about things in a more analog way? So actually, and then that leans into the kind of give me the space to exercise my human skills. And it's very easy to actually start to build some of that into the ways of working. So a lot of the stuff that I do with teams around thinking about how they operate, what that cadence might look like, but also where can you introduce nature into this conversation? How do you go out and actually have a nature, a time to actually think and spend time out, because that will give you different perspectives, and that kind of going out with a question and actually sort of pondering on that for a dog walk, as is my sort of typical way most mornings. Actually, you get to use that opportunity to be curious about that. So I think it's almost how can we, at the same time that we're getting really high tech, how do we also look for those analog opportunities that can, because they may seem a distant, but actually the more you overlap those and make sure you exercise in both elements is going to give you a more kind of wholesome view, I think.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing here?
Sorry, Kerstin, you go.
Because the only thing I want to highlight here, that there is a danger that this is becoming yet another task for us as individuals, our own awareness, our own burden of managing the balance, even though we may be operating in systems that are demanding something very different from us. And I think we have to make sure we acknowledge that we're operating in a system at the most macro level is a capitalist system, which in and of itself is not the problem. Capitalist system, works on competition and cooperation. And the reality is that over the last recent years, the cooperation has dropped. So to me, the key element here is that we need each other in this. We need to support each other in navigating this and challenging the conditions, the environment, the system as a whole. So staying in our bubble, I think we're going to have a really hard time. Whereas opening up and connecting with each other and actually cooperating and supporting, sharing ideas of how we're doing it, that is important.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
Can I
before
ask a question of the people in the webinar, as well as obviously the other hosts? Is anybody deliberately and intentionally doing what I'm calling slow thinking, which is take yourself away, get paper out? Tom, I can see you've got whiteboards, and actually move away from this, this accelerated speed of thought that AI enables. I certainly am. I've got Miro boards called slow thinking. I've got pad and paper. I go on dog walks. My brain is screaming at me, if you want quality, slow down. That's the underlying thought going through my brain. It's not a conscious thought. My brain's shouting at me sometimes, slow the fuck down, quality suffering, and you're going to come up with something better if you slow down. Is anyone else experiencing that as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Mateo says, if people can't see it, I believe that the challenge opportunity is around AI can help us, or actually allow us to focus on the important human stuff. So we can be better humans with better connections, which, and that's we've got to see in the workplace. I've had many conversations with organizations that are not looking to grow headcount because the mundanity of work can be taken away with automation and AI support. So we're freeing up our brains to do deeper, better thinking in a more collaborative way. We can't do that in isolation. Mm-hmm. We can only do that together. So how do organizations invest in the human engaged employee experience?
Yeah.
There was a really interesting article on Harvard Business Review recently around AI leading to brain fry. And I think that's what Matt was referring to. And I think we're all experiencing that, and that yearning for, creating space to think. I found that I would, if I write articles, I would put it through AI to help me with structuring, because that's not my strength, and with the spelling, because English is not my first language. But it would give me so many iterations that by the end of it, I would spend so much time trying to make sure to put it back into my own voice that I've given up, and I've gone back to pen and paper and writing my articles, because it just doesn't sound right otherwise anymore. Yeah. So that's a learning curve, isn't it? And an awareness that actually we are not failing if we're experiencing that brain fry. It's the system causing that.
Yeah. And there's almost this kind of this productivity paradox, right? Where you're thinking about, I can do more, so I will. And are you spending that time doing the right things? Interestingly, this kind of came to me. So I love the talk on pen and paper. I've recently got a pocketbook, which is I take it out on walks with me, and I purposely don't want to use my phone, so I'll use that. But actually, I come back and then I'll sit and I'll use Whisper Flow, which means I can dictate into Claude. I'm like, these are the ideas I've had. I've been thinking about this. So then it can kind of take that and structure it. So it's kind of finding the balance, I think, that works for you. I'm also a sketcher, so I've got dot paper where I just scribble when I'm on any calls with any clients, and that's how I use that. So I think there's definitely that kind of that finding the balance, and yeah, it's realizing the weird realization I had a couple of days ago was that I was using Claude Cowork to build a thing. At the time that it was saying Claude was doing the work, I was thinking about this concept of how you claim back the time that AI gives you back. And I was there and I was reading a book about AI as AI was doing the work that I was waiting for it to do. So I was just thinking when it comes to what you're doing with the time that you get back, be thoughtful about that, because you can find yourself in this kind of loop if you're not too careful, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Don't panic. So we're sort of heading into the final 10 minutes. So yeah, any more questions, please? We can hopefully see the poll results in a moment. However, I just wanted to sort of go back to the panel and maybe press them on back to the topic around leadership and the use of AI and sort of helping teams. We've had all sorts of threads: ethics, nervousness, excitement, all the rest of it. What would be the kind of one piece of advice that you're going to leave people on this webinar to think about for leaders to potentially think about, implement, talk about?
I think my first advice would be, especially if AI hasn't been implemented or there isn't a formal strategy or anything like that there yet, there's just we should be using AI. And if you are a leader, is create a space for dialogue, where people can bring their fears and their concerns. People can bring their ideas and their excitement, and all of it, is acknowledged and has room. And from there, looking at, okay, so what would be a useful way of playing with it, experimenting with it in a low stakes environment where there is no expectations yet on what the output needs to be, so that it's safe. And with that experimentation, it then becomes clearer on what the ethical boundaries should be. What does that framework look like for your team or for your organization? And my recommendation would be, look at your values framework and use the existing values framework, which hopefully is lived values and not just values on a wall. And how does that relate to you bringing AI into your organization?
Thank you, Kerstin. Matt, Tom, who wants to go next?
You've been shaping my thoughts through the dialogue, and I'm still, like everybody, we're still making this up and evolving. But you've reminded me, we used to do more of in an old company that I built and sold, but we do a bit of in the current one, which is a discipline called show and tell, where people used to come to a room, show you what you'd been worked on, what they'd innovated, an algorithm they'd built, or something they'd put together, and discuss it. And that Friday afternoon practice was where more cross-fertilization of ideas and more normalization of stuff happened than at any other place. So if I was a leader right now, I would be always in that room on a Friday at 2:00, whenever it was, and I would be getting people to come with their laptops or join remotely to say, how are you using AI this week? And I would normalize it, and I would celebrate the wins and the failures. I would, like we've done, you say, well, actually, I've fallen into the trap of taking some of this too literally and verbatim and not challenging it. It's not just about how you're succeeding with it, it's how you're failing with it. And I would look to normalize all of this. And I would, as a leader, I would never miss the Friday at 2 session.
Thank you. Tom?
I love the Friday at 2 session and the sound of that. I used to do something a long time ago with innovation teams called Church of Fail, and we'd get everybody to do our huddle, celebrate the fails that we'd had that week, and really clap them in, because it was kind of, when you're failing, you're learning. As long as you fail forward, you're on the right track. Look, for me, and I think I've just seen the question from Alistair come through that as well, which is linked to this, like what's the one thing that business leaders should do to optimize how their teams adopt AI? Like, this is about creating an environment that enables people to be curious, enables people to be creative, but creates the space for people to have that kind of opportunity to learn. So that kind of space and conditions, exactly like what Matt was talking about then. Put something in the diary that actually signals that this is something that's important, and we want to bring you in on this kind of this journey around how we confidently co-create what the future looks like together. And using your existing culture as that kind of real thing that you can anchor back to, and how does it link to your values, and think about what that looks like, I think is critical. So there's almost those small moments that leaders can do and can kind of create that say, it's safe. It's safe for a number of things. It's safe not to know what, it's safe to be a bit nervous and a bit apprehensive. It's also safe to share your ideas. It's also safe to think about what we could do better as a team. So it's all around creating that safety, that psychological safety, which, as we know, is a huge driver of innovation. So it's about creating those conditions around that. And actually, what leaders can also do, which is even more powerful, is share a little bit of vulnerability for themselves, that how they're feeling about things, when actually, they may have their own sort of concerns around some of this, what this means for them and the organization as well. So I think actually really contracting up front and creating those spaces can lead to some really powerful insights and opportunities from places where you may have least expected them to come from, if you open up the opportunity for people to be part of that journey. And I think actually the other thing, and another comment I'm seeing in the questions, asked around the confidence gaps across generations. Now, against this changing backdrop, we've also got this kind of scenario where we've got 5 generations in the workforce, all with very different needs and experiences and how they've used technology up until now. This technological change will impact right across our lives. So there's huge opportunity for that wisdom exchange across generations as well, to really be part of that kind of discussion too. Because I always think there's so much that you can learn, and actually we need to cut the kind of this conversation around a generational divide and open up for generational exchange, because there's opportunities to retain organizational knowledge that way, but also to share skills and digital native skills that might be really helpful for someone else. So a program which I used to do back when I was in house was how do we pair our senior executives with somebody that is kind of an AI guru, right? So actually, how can we really connect them so they've got a reverse mutual mentoring relationship? Yeah. Huge value for the colleague who's probably quite a lot more junior in that space as well, and the senior leader to have that interaction. Those develop into really deep, lasting, full, meaningful, in-person human connection and relationships.
I think thank you. So we're cruising into time out. In summary, this is an incredibly human experience. AI does not have the answers. The human beings, our experience, the human condition, and our relationships inside of those workplaces are what is going to make the biggest difference. And leaders that can be open and honest and share their experience, whether it's a nothing or an everything, and making it safe to talk about it is the winning approach here. I think, do we see the poll? Do we follow that up afterwards? I think we might get the poll result up on screen now. So there we go. So the winner there is that confidence gap, that confidence gap across that multi-generation, which is, potentially the easiest thing to fix, right? Just setting up conversations and scenarios and ways of actually communicating about it is got to be the easiest challenge to fix.
And I would say, look, this is the bread and butter, right? This is the most important thing, and so much value comes from it. I'm working on a number of these things. If you want to talk a little bit more, then just connect with me on LinkedIn, because there's so much value in it, and from all parties. And I think we've got the opportunity to change the way that generational perspectives are.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other last comments?
I think I just want to reiterate
thank you for hosting. No, sorry, I was just saying thank you. Thank you for hosting. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the perspectives. I've learnt lots and hopefully contributed a little.
Kerstin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of circle back to and reiterate what Tom was saying, is about that connection and conversation and supporting each other. So, friends, family, colleagues, have the conversation, talk about how you're using it, what you're afraid of, what you're worried about, and let's build the patterns together and share them, because, yes, we may be competing, but we're not going to win on our own in isolation. We have to cooperate, because this, AI is a massive force that is impacting all of us, and I think we've got to support each other to move through it. Yeah. And yes, thank you very much for your great questions, Collette, and for Tom and Matt, for the panel. Really interesting and insightful ideas as we go through it, and Don't Panic for hosting us and the great questions from the audience. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Don't Panic. Thanks so much for your interaction today. Audiences, it was great to challenge those questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.